computer do what it does well and would be very tedious for us. And we can spend our time doing design and other value add work. So yes, I want to be out of that job, but I still want a job, just a better job.
So what is the tedious parts that deserve automation programming, Juan? Or you can just skip that and go, what's the cool parts?
Yeah, so I'll kind of latch on what Scott was saying around the metadata programming. So as an example, we have, and I've done this many times before, we have a very complicated data pipeline that in our company that's a core pipeline for our core data coming from our customers. And it works almost exclusively with metadata. So we have essentially our client account managers can log into the system, set up the metadata with a GUI interface, and basically configure a set of very complicated contracted rules for every one of our clients for a variety of use cases. We're talking 30, 40,000 of these rules that exist to kind of manage the complexity of the contracts. So that's something that we built with the thinking that that would stop all the hand coding. So we kind of looked through and identified all the little things they tweak, and we abstracted it and allowed them to affect it with metadata.
Okay. Nice. Rob, how do you like the programming taking over from the metadata versus automation versus doing it yourself? What do you have to say about programming the code?
I have to say that any chance that I can possibly get, I will try to script something. And I'm right with Scott when he was saying, like, writing out 1,000,000 columns throughout my day is probably the worst thing you could ask me to do. I'd rather spend the time to write a Python script to do that for me. And to Juan's statement with DBT, there's a number of things that scripts that you can build in DBT to actually, or inside and outside of DBT to generate that metadata. So
say a little bit more about DBT in case that's news for people.
Okay, so DBT is the data build tool. It is essentially a code-centric tool that allows you to focus more on writing SQL and the business logic of integrating things together than it is on the administration of how things interact. I mean, like the administration of like, when does my job run, etc. What job has to run before what job, for what job. DBT takes care of that all for you. There is some configuration to it, but it's not the focus of it. I'd say during development, I'm probably spending like 80-90% of my time actually building something, using SQL, using Jinja, which is a templating language inside of DBT to abstract out the tables and function calls and et cetera that would make it more like environment specific. So it's really a great tool to be able to do that. But on the other side,
what was the name of that again?
DBT.
Oh, you said
or the tool
else.
Jinja, yeah, it's a templating language that DBT uses to basically just I think the best way to think of it is like a find and replace statement. So depending on what environment that my code is running in, that Jinja will do a find and replace inside where you've defined things and replace it with that value that it happens to be. So when you're building code, you put the Jinja reference or source or whatever, dependent macro, whatever you're building, where you would put, say, like a table name, and then it would, when you run that code runs in a particular environment, it will do a find and replace and find that particular reference and replace it with an actual table name so it runs. Probably getting too much in the weeds here, but going back into the engineering coding, these are perfect tools, and then there are other tools too that you can script out and basically create a number of models very quickly just using metadata from the source system, so we don't have to do all that manual work. In fact, if I had to, even some of the more advanced stuff in DBT, if I can find a way to script it, I will. And that to me is the most interesting part of my day. That's what makes, data engineering fun to me, is a coding aspect to my job, so that I'm doing something that's repeatable that somebody else can do, then I can teach somebody else. It's built off of metadata that I don't have to necessarily maintain, but somebody can, if we need to add in new tables, we just add it to a, a set place, or it gets automatically loaded, and then I'm hands off and I can focus on other cool stuff. So
Okay. Nice. Any other thoughts from panelists that you wanted to interject on the coding aspects? That driven or not?
Might be worth noting that, we might all have our kind of go-to tools, whether it's DBT or straight up Python, Edge Data Factory, but if you're either a smaller organization or new to it, there's also a lot of no code or low code kind of options. And, there might be different levels of capability that you get out of that. But if you're trying to move data from one point to another, so, on the Microsoft side, there's things like Power Automate and others, but you can kind of have like a drop down of like, I have an Excel spreadsheet, I want to move it here, and you can kind of pick your options. So there's a lot of different tools out there. We've just listed a few, and they range from no code, low code to straight up coding.
Thanks, Scott, because I'm a fan myself over the years of not coding. I spent more of my time in business intelligence side, coming from what people want as a report, getting to visuals, getting to the data, and I don't really want to write a lot of code when I want to just go get the data, so.
And it depends on what you're trying to do. So yeah, if you want to say, every time I save this Excel spreadsheet, put it in SharePoint, in Power Automate, those are going to be 2 drop-down selections where, yes, you could do it in Python, but why? It's so simple that way. So it depends on how much control and complexity you really need.
I will say, the next topic is around like the DevOps and the continuous deployment and continuous integration aspects, getting that responsible for changes regularly, continuing to push stuff out. That my low code ways are a lot harder. Code has that advantage. So Scott, go ahead and talk a bit about DevOps, data ops.
So I mostly work in the Microsoft Azure space. So within Azure DevOps, they have something called DevOps pipelines. They can use a YAML-based definition. There's also a classic editor, which is more of the visual interface for creating that. But YAML, Y-A-M-L, you'll see that as a way of coding a lot of these flows of to deploy your data. So Terraform is another company, and that can be cross-platform, so not just Microsoft, but if you're deploying to a different cloud platform, you can use that as well. So what I really like about it is you can define, at least in a cloud-based solution, you can define the specific services you want. So as part of my deployment, when I check something in, it actually spins up the various tools that I need, the different services that I'm going to use in that cloud solution, and it deploys my code as well. So essentially, every time I commit my code in Git, you might be using Azure DevOps or GitHub. Whenever I commit my code, it's automatically essentially building a release, packaging it up, and it can deploy it to an environment. And then if I want to promote that to a test environment, I can just click a button and it takes that same code and moves it into a test environment. And so essentially what you're doing is you're just scripting the deployment of your code, but you're doing it in a standard way where I'm old enough that whatever, 10, 20 years ago, if you want to deploy, someone would say, send me a script with all your changes. And you would essentially recode everything that you thought should happen to get your changes out there. But it was all based on your memory. So you'd be like, oops, I forgot something or whatever. So it wasn't consistent. Where now you're literally taking the same code and saying, I want that same code in this environment. So if you tested it in your test environment and now you literally take that same code and put it in prod, you should get the exact same result. So it's much more consistent and carefree. We used to spend, you'd go, past midnight into the next day sometimes with someone who's trying to get a deployment right. Now, literally, I might do all on a conference call. I can click a button and say, yeah, just send the code through.
Juan, any things that you do similarly or different tools, or what do you like about
Yes,
CS?
so we are on the GCP stack. But it's all the same kind of thing. So one of the things I think would be interesting to talk about here, a separate topic, is just the effect software engineering has had on this. So like what you were describing, with software engineering, it's been 20 years, 30 years since we've done that. But it looks like this is just coming to data, right, from my
Yeah.
perspective. So I come from a heavy software engineering background. And then in our company, everything is automated. All our infrastructure is done with Terraform. All of our code releases are triggered off of commits to code that run the test suite, including our data engineering. We don't treat data any different from our software. It is going through the same process.
The challenge I've had, because I'm not an expert on using CI/CD approaches to my data ops, is the code and the data are not in the same place. Databases are different than the integrations needed to pull from them, the scripts that are pulling, or the schemas changes that are expected downstream might not always match the data, because I can't just redeploy a terabyte worth of database. So CI/CD has been challenging. But software people that have been doing this for years are always surprised that why is it not used more in data? What has been your experience around how these tools are bridging that gap so that CI/CD is possible?
Yeah, on that data side, that's more about how you set it up. So on our side, what we do is we have various environments and they have various types of data. So our lowest environment, our development environment, has got very little data that we copy, anonymized from production. And as we go up the stack, it has more and more of the data until we get to pre-release, which is just it is prod data, but run it in a separate environment. So we're pretty confident that we run our test runs. That's how we handle that.
That's fair. Some of the challenges to that maybe you can speak to, any panelist can, tell me shut up or speak to it. Often that kind of thing is with the idea of having a test environment. Well, if it's not full of the same amount of data to the same variation that my production system is going to have,
Yep.
The test isn't valid.
It's valid, it's just not complete.
Okay.
Right?
I've been killed by a whole bunch of reporting against test data that didn't play out when it was finally against probiotic prop
And
data.
that happens to us, certainly
Okay.
when we pull the full on state of the production data and we run a new transformation over it and we miss an edge case, something, we don't have a test to validate ahead of time, it falls through.
Okay.
But we'll have to test and it gets better over time.
Okay. Rob, do you have your similarities on how you are working with CI/CD?
Just like Scott. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, data ops, yes.
Yeah, data ops. Yep. So we use Azure DevOps for the majority of our projects, and it's been really night and day difference from having to deploy things manually, making sure things don't break. And have it integrated with our Git repositories. It's just made life a whole lot easier. I've dealt with building pipelines. I've deployed pipelines. I've made tweaks to them all the time. I've noticed that a lot of pipelines generally need some sort of manual configuration every once in a while. So it's not, in my experience, not always, but bunch of them have always been needed to be maintained in certain ways as our tool sets change a little bit too, and version changing and things like that. So it's not, in my experience, not 100% hands off, but for the most of the time, it has been very seamless deployment of code out in an environment with very little issues with the actual pipelines themselves.
Question for the whole panel, but I'll put Rob have dibs on it. When it comes to that value that's being added CI/CD and you're finding it easy to do and Azure DevOps is helping so much, how much would you say that's an element of the advantages the cloud platform has, because a lot of the data and the services and the things are all in that cloud platform talking to the same orchestration, the same CI/CD versus in the past where it was on premise and even getting the test system to talk or be talked to by some orchestration became a huge nightmare because they're not really the same things. Test systems are a completely separate thing. Is the cloud really changing the game and making CI/CD easier, Rob?
I would say so. There's a lot of integrations that things that are on premise are, I would say, a little bit harder to connect to. So having a CI/CD process integrated in the cloud, I think makes it a lot easier to mm, deploy from different environments because all that code can be um, basically generated. I wouldn't say I'm the expert in getting it to work inside the cloud itself, but it is it's definitely a huge advantage that I can see it over a um, kind of more of an on-prem solution that
Yep. Anybody, any panelists doing CI/CD with confidence not cloud? Or think back to when they did, go, don't want to do that anymore.
You can do it. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. For me, the kind of big things are in the cloud, you can very easily spin up another environment, another instance of your database, or two, it's serverless, in which case you're not really paid for the time you're running those tests. The other thing is just the massive compute power you get. So I can think back, we had a data science pipeline that was taking 20 hours on-prem to run. It took 5 minutes and so it's kind of crazy. So you're able to test those things much faster.
Nice. All right. So data lineage is a big part of that metadata and managing that data lineage. I wanted to talk a bit about the importance of that or your experiences with data lineage. Scott.
This is an area I think certainly could be improved upon. I've had solutions where we've leveraged, and it kind of ties into catalog where as you're moving data through your process, doing that engineering and curation, that you might have metadata that drives that process, and you can simply expose that same metadata and say, here's the lineage, this is how you're tying things together. You can have other tools like data catalog, which is on our list, that would also, give you that visual representation. But honestly, I still see a lot of projects that don't spend as much time on that because some of those tools might still not be embraced by the organization or the metadata. I don't know. I haven't seen a silver bullet tool where this is like the best practice and everybody's using it. So I still think there's room to shake up the industry there yet as far as ease of use and value to the business.
Yep, I agree with that. Why are, whatever you want to say about it, but why is a lineage and a catalog not valuable enough for businesses to do it as a matter of course?
I want to go back to what I said before, it's because it's a separate process, right, that has to be done independently. If you can embed those things inside of your process, your development process, and around the metadata, you'll be far more successful, I think. But there is no silver bullet right now. As an example, we talked about DBT. The data lineage you get out of that, you get for free, which is super nice, because that's the way you program. You say these tables come together in this transform, and it just comes out. So that's the type of thing when I say embedded in your process, that's what I kind of mean, is how can we push more of that in? The same happens with definitions of fields and tables. The more, that's the strategy when we get to cataloging, and that's the kind of strategy we're trying to get to, is pushing all of our metadata intrinsic in the thing that's storing it, database tables, GCS files, whatever it is, and then suck that out in a catalog. And so it's embedded in the process, and nobody's curating, it's curated as part of the development process.
Nice. Rob, any experiences with data lineage or how that relates to the data catalog?
yeah. So I think the most useful information that data lineage can give us is at its most granular level, because with that, then we can do just about anything with it. Whereas, and in addition to that, also end-to-end lineage from the moment we're grabbing data from its source all the way up to the reporting layer and who's ever consuming it, because that way we can do impact analysis to see, like, if we do change something or if there's something wrong, we know who's going to be affected by it, we know what reports are going to be affected by it. But the problem is that it's incredibly difficult to get that level of detail, especially because these tool sets are so different from one another, and there isn't a whole lot of tools that really combine that together. I know that there's some really cool ones that do that in certain ways, like Calibra, and there's another one off the tip of my tongue. And they d- and it gets really complicated. And I've even tried to make, well, I did sort of make my own lineage tool at one point where I tried to do end to end the Microsoft stack, and even that was incredibly difficult because of the different tooling sets and the changes to the actual program. So from version to version, things might have broke, so it was difficult to get those connections back again. And if we're going to do any sort of lineage, it's like, okay, when we say lineage, it's like that to me means, okay, that is the most basic lineage you can get. It's like this object points to this data source, end of story, no other details beyond that. I know that DBT gets really in depth with that, so that's a great tool to dive into um, actual tables, columns, relationships, and how that works. But there's other tools like Power BI where it's like it's almost a black box after data enters in it, unless you're opening up the actual PBX files and looking at them. And I know there's tools to decode them and et cetera. But the real challenge is on the reporting side to get that information. And that's, I'm just speaking from experience. But the going back to, if we can focus on those tools to incorporate data lineage into our day to day, I think you will see like big returns in the amount of effort and time it takes for a team to work, because they will then know if I make a change anywhere in this process, they know it's going to change downstream, upstream, and even just for like impact analysis take forever sometimes because you have to look through everything, and then you have to go through this wild goose chase. And if you have that data at your fingertips, it's a matter of minutes. So it really helps your overall team, at least in my opinion, that it would be huge to have data lineage incorporated as part of our, and almost, I'd say, like that should be one of our tech deck goals, as we'd say, to incorporate that into our team to be able so that we can answer questions like that when they do arise. And the data lineage tool would be the one like tool that could figure all this out for you very easy, very quickly, and let us focus on the things that actually matter and need to be done. So
Yeah.
that's my say.
Well,
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm very passionate about this subject, and I'm in the middle of evaluating third parties, and I've also taken a look at DBT and as well as custom built things in the past. And our business users really push for the how did my data get from A to Z and what happened to it on the way. And that whole, it came from here, landed here, and ended up as my measure, and that's how it's calculated. Also with that, onboarding of staff and contractors and the education that it helps. And as we pick up code from contractors and try to take on support, we see benefit there. And as Rob indicated, the impact analysis. What I'm seeing from a vendor's perspective is that they're strong, that they're all slightly different in that they started out in wherever they started, and they're coming to data lineage from different places. And what I'm seeing with Purview right now is in the Microsoft space is that
Azure Purview.
Azure Purview, yeah. They their Power BI is separate from their ADF. And also, however, it does give you some dependency information for Power BI. Also, the SQL part, you can't drill into it to see it. And then ADF, you have to open ADF as part of the Purview lineage to see what happened. So it's very, I think they realize that there's a need for this, but it's very immature. And third parties, Elations and the Calibers of the world, very expensive. Started in the cataloging space, getting into the lineage. One thing that Elation does is that it reads the SQL logs and it learns how queries are being executed, and that's how they're building lineage. I haven't gotten deep enough with Calibre to determine if that's the same with them. Where Rob is at currently, that company Sub-Zero, they switched from Calibre to Metaphor, and Metaphor is a very small company, a startup. But one of the things they're adding to learning lineage and also learning cataloging is they actually, in addition to the queries that they're monitoring, they're monitoring even teams to help build. That gets more into the catalog information. So people are talking about a measure or something, they'll bring that in and add that to the information about a data element. Very interesting. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, the data lineage and the cataloging and those kinds of things seem to be, like you said, Scott, not the first thing that is involved in these projects. So is this the bleeding edge of the data modernization? Because it's just not, it's starting to be done more, and pioneers are saying there's value in it, like Nicole. It's still, something, however, that's hard to do.
I thought there's been value for a very long time. It's just that we had to do it. We had to do it ourselves, right?
Yeah, manually it loses value because it might become out of date or inaccurate, and then obviously there isn't much value. Being able to easily automatically capture it by baking it into how you're developing or the metadata you're using to drive your process, that's better. But it's still hard to get something that can capture all of the complexity of what might go into that and make it easy for the end user to, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to understand.
So the other approach that I've seen, or that I've heard talked about, in addition to what you were saying about trying to infer from kind of other data, is that there is some efforts to kind of standardize what this lineage metadata looks like. And so you could export it out of DBT, you could export it out of Spark, you could export it out of Looker, and then you can merge them all together and kind of see where they connect. So that's the other path forward here, because we lose lineage tracking certain as soon as we move across our different tools, right? We move from essentially Spark to DBT, we've lost lineage that happened in Spark. We only have it in DBT layer.
Nice. All right, we're down to last 15, 20 minutes or so, because we want people to also get a break and network a bit here. So as we get to the last pieces, this might translate into the next panel or something to talk about, but data quality. This is pretty huge, might not fit in 15 minutes for everybody to talk about their particular aspects, but data quality involves completeness, consistency, conformity, accuracy, the integrity, and the timeliness. I'm going to say, each panelist, talk a bit about your favorite parts of data quality, maybe your favorite example of what's going on in your data quality world. Rob.
Well, I have a pretty practical approach to this because I haven't really worked with many tools that dealt with data quality. But I will share my experiences with how we do tackle it in, say, a company that isn't quite ready to have that state, but has done it successfully. And basically, what I've done in the past, or been in companies that I've done in the past, is we just report on the data as is, good, bad, and ugly. And we have liaisons inside the business that we are the go-to. So basically, just to make it more concise here, explanation. So for every like data model or tabular model or cube that we have, that is assigned to somebody in the business. And that person if there's an issue with the data, that person is the first point of contact to say like, hey, did you check your system to see if something went wrong or somebody fat fingered something? And 9 times out of 10, that's what happened to be. Sometimes, we'd make a mistake when we would deploy changes and whatnot, but um, it really going through that sort of a method of doing data quality by having the users govern it themselves by having a single point of contact really helped kind of streamline our team so that when we had to do support, it was a heck of a lot easier because we know exactly who to talk to. We could talk to this person, they would take care of it. That would be our liaison. They would research it, investigate it, get back to us and say, oh yeah, we had to do, somebody did something wrong and we'll get it fixed. And that helped a lot of things because the data got cleaned. We were able to lessen the amount of support that we were spent working on these data models. And it just kind of worked for us in the company that I was at the time. And there are different degrees of that throughout other companies that I've worked at, and but they all kind of follow the same pattern. It's like we have a set group of super users. Maybe it's not just one person, and they come to us with an issue, and we say, look at this table in the source system. But the benefits of having an actual like business user that understands the system a little bit is that they can then go and they know exactly what to look at, and we wouldn't necessarily have to point at them. So sometimes a BA would work very well for this scenario. But that's and as far as like, consistency, completeness, basically we've built our models out in a Kimball star schema. We count for late arriving data, and that's kind of built into the model itself. And that kind of goes through the completeness and timeliness. The integrity is that's always kind of a struggle because we don't always like if and this is kind of the bane of the data engineer's existence is that somebody makes a change upstream in the source system, doesn't tell us about it, breaks everything downstream. That has always been a problem no matter what company I've been at, and something that is you think it would be unavoidable, but it's not. But there really isn't much we can do as a data engineer unless they actually talk to us about it beforehand. And then the integrity of the data can also really shine, especially in a like tabular model or a cube that where you can see things at a very high level because everything is all aggregated then. So if there is like warts in the data, they're very like in your face when you're looking at stuff at a high level, as opposed to, your more like detailed reports where things could be hidden very easily. So just having that in place, and throughout the years I've also built various like audit reports as kind of like a gut check. So if there is something that I could do as a developer or engineer to be able to like head off a problem and that I know is going to come or could come, I will create my own audit report that gets, sent to me, or look at it every day so that I can use that to, you know, as kind of like the first line of defense for doing, support type work or somebody else on the team. So that's my that's kind of the experience I've had with the data quality side of things. I know it's not as nice as having like a full on application to handle this stuff, but when you don't have that tool, this is what I've done to make it make do.
I'm hearing having the owner and the steward and the governor to be the business people that know it the well helps with, everybody feeling the data has more quality and improving it. Yeah, I like.
Yeah.
Scott, what's your experience with data quality?
I mean, I like that general philosophy. You could say that you want to take it out, quarantine it, but unless you're gonna develop a business process around reviewing that, which again, could be part of a data governance process, great. But in general, I think the best kind of first minimal viable step is exposing it. And generally, one of the first outcomes of any end user analytics project is as soon as they can start slicing and dicing and, all of a sudden you see these outliers, the business can fix those themselves once they're aware of it. So to some extent, just exposing that data, having transparency, I think that's just one way to address it. I do think depending on what your use is, you might have to go further than that. So if you're doing, for example, a machine learning application on it, you probably actually do want to remove some of those outliers and anomalies. So if, for example, if you had percentages and you had like 0.07 is how you want to capture 7%, but somebody actually put in 7. Well, now you're going to interpret that as 700% instead of 7%, and that's going to throw things off. So if for certain things, depending on what your requirements are, you might need to do some cleansing where you're throwing out those anomalies and outliers. But if it's just end user analytics, sometimes the simplest solution is simply exposing it, let the business see it, find it, fix it.
Talk a bit about, you said something about quarantining. Have you experiences where quarantining's helpful to improve the quality? I would think that that just leads to another form of owner data stewardship so that they can say, no, it's ready to, we need to say, get it out of quarantine because we need it to keep doing our.
Yeah,
business.
so I use the term kind of generically. So if you were doing a homegrown solution, it simply means rather than putting it in the table where it's now part of your metrics, you kind of put it in a separate holding area, to your point. SQL Server and others have had their own data quality services where you actually could essentially expose those to end users. They could essentially click an approve button, and then that might trigger a process to actually allow it through. So yes, whether it's a custom built process or leveraging some sort of data quality management tool, you can handle it that way so that you're explicitly flagging it, exposing it, letting them correct it. And some of those tools though might correct it just going through to where you're doing your reporting. Ideally, if you can go back to the source and fix it at the source, because it might feed into other things as well, that's ideal if you can.
Wow, data quality in your world.
So I'm super passionate with data quality. But let's maybe.
You got no more than 10 minutes.
No more than 10 minutes, no, I can't talk for 10 minutes. So let's talk about it this way. So I think there's two pieces for us. There's two pieces of this. So one, we integrate with maybe 400 systems. We're a SaaS company, remember? So we get data from clients. I think we have around 400 connections to external systems. And data is constantly coming at us. That, in a traditional kind of, I think what you and Rob were describing would be untenable for us. So what we did is we built the system around it. We basically have checks that come in, validate the data, and pull out anomalies and let account managers work through it and reach out back to partners and customers and correct it before it gets in. So it's kind of like a quarantine, but it's ahead of time. It's literally part of the system.
Why is it so important? No one's gonna die.
Nobody's gonna die, but people like their money exchange to be accurate.
Okay. Nice.
But the other piece of this is once we get the data and we have kind of accepted it as good, we do more stuff to it, right? We transform it, we run machine learning models on it, we're producing other metrics that we sell back to our clients. And that's where we have a lot of accuracy checks, and we have embedded that into our process, right? So we have the equivalent of what we call unit tests in software development in our data. We have all the things around integrity, conformity, missing data. We have all those checks that's built into our process. It's part of the PR process. Whenever you commit something to our source control system, somebody has to review it. We have all these checks to make sure that all those things are kind of accounted for new development. So we embed that part into our kind of development process. So we have built it into our system and built it into our process.
You've liked this for a while. Do you have anything to say about cloud's impact on this?
The cloud's impact on this?
Are you always doing this in the cloud?
We were always doing,
I mean,
we were doing this on-prem actually for a while. What the cloud has allowed us to do is on the calculation side, as I mentioned before, allow us to kind of calculate over all of our data versus the subset, so we.
Does it speed up
Because
quality?
it does, in terms of the speed, the turnaround time is so much faster, especially on our machine learning models.
Does that extra speed and turnaround time come at a cost? That's cost of quality metrics that have changed, or
Talk more.
like if it's, data quality has a certain value, you need to do it, but it costs to implement it. And cloud, sure, has more compute power, usually at more cost. So does a cost of quality enter into why and when and how you measure the qualities? The right return on investment, especially if you put it up to the cloud and suddenly it's costing you 10,000, CPU hours in a day.
So I don't know how to answer that question yet.
Okay. Ooh, all right.
I don't know if we had
I'll say-
this before, and I don't know, and we built so much more on top of it that
Okay.
I don't think we can compare apples to apples in that
Okay.
scenario.
Gotcha.
But I do think, there's a few things. So one, cloud should ideally let you to get more to consumption-based cost.
It does.
Meaning rather than having this capacity just sitting there, you're only paying for what you use. So,
Correct.
the more validation you're doing, the more you pay, yes, but if you're not validating, you're not paying.
Correct.
Yeah, but if I don't even have a test server or unit testing happening, I save a lot of compute.
That's true.
I always say that the cost of people time is far more expensive than the compute time.
Generally, yes, that's true. So for example, like in Azure Function, so if you just want to run some sort of validation function, I don't know if you can run 1 million calls for $1, let's say something like that, so it would take a long time before you even pay for an hours of someone's time versus doing 1 million validations. And I think the other advantage cloud can bring is more event driven. So to your point, as things are landing, you can immediately trigger maybe a validation service. And just have that upfront real-time validating on the fly versus this, big batch of what to do. So you can give pretty quick response. As soon as somebody submits something, you could go validate it, send it right back and be like, hey, this has an issue.
Nice. Excellent. Any other thoughts on data quality that you didn't get to express? All right. Well, that is a good point to wrap up the discussions on this. We will be having some of the points here for future that we'll be talking and maybe dive into some tech stack differences and privacy security were things that we were hoping to hit on at future panels. We really appreciate that you guys come to our meetup, and we're going to be building these out as we get into the next year, but please sign up for the social, meet others and encourage people to come in that space, and we'll be doubling down as we get to 2023 with more of these kind of panel discussions. It's been great to have everybody.
Paul,
Yes.
you just opened up for general question and general discussion.
Yeah. Do we have any questions out there that people who put into the chat? If you want to quick put them in, if you want to unmute, if the microphone's working very well, we don't have 30 people on the line, so. Even if it's not a question, feel free to unmute and thank the panelists and tell them what you learned tonight, because it's always gratifying to hear that you learned something. Jeff's good for that. Come on, Jeff.
I got a question, if you guys can hear me okay.
Okay.
This is Josh Limbaum. So this question is mainly an Azure question. So with moving data from point A to point D, what have you guys found the best to use? Or maybe even in this example, if you had the option of using Synapse pipelines or using Azure Data Factory pipelines, what would you guys mainly prefer?
I'll send it to Juan first.
That's probably a bad choice.
Yeah, that's why I did it. The other guys have more knowledge, you can just pass to them.
I'll pass.
Okay. Scott.
I'm gonna say there isn't a best, and so I'm often in the Azure space. So first, yeah.
That's the best. Look right over there.
So there's a number of factors. So one is what cloud platform, or are you on-prem? So obviously, if you're a Google Cloud platform, if you're an Azure platform, that might be a factor. The other is it might be the skill set you have in-house. So whatever you're able to do well, that might be just as important as the quote unquote best tool. What tools do I use most frequently? You're right, I do use Azure pipelines. Synapse pipelines are very similar. What I would throw in the mix would be things like more coding, Databricks, Azure Functions. So to me, each of those can be great and they can be bad in certain scenarios. What I try to think of is how chatty they are. So for example, if I need to process a million objects, like spinning through them, Azure Data Factory isn't as great at that. It's more batch based. So if I have to do a million activity calls, I'm paying per activity and its cost isn't crazy expensive, but it's much more expensive than say an Azure function where I can call one function, I can have a for loop within it, go through my million things that I need to process and only pay for a single call. And I can do a million of those for say $1. So if I have something that's extremely chatty, lots and lots of calls, so I had a REST API, for example. I called the REST API once and say, tell me everything that changed. And now, unfortunately, for every one of those entities, I had to go do a separate call to go get the details. It was very chatty. Azure Data Factory was a little bit less cost effective than say, just programming it to hit that API. But if I have something that's batch based, and I just want to hit maybe a similar API, but it lets me just get all the actual data itself in one big chunk, Azure Data Factory might actually handle that quite well and efficiently, cost effectively. So then I would do that. So sometimes you have to make sure you understand the pricing model when you're, at least in cloud-based. Is it more, are you paying kind of per call, or is it more kind of batch oriented and you pick your service based on that? And I would guess there's some similar, on the Google Cloud side, right? There's some tools that are more batch oriented and some that are.
Yeah, it's true. And then we try not to move data at all, right? So if you're all in one cloud, at Google, at least you're able to pull data into your warehouse from the warehouse automatically. There's built-in connections, right? So you don't have to move it yourself. So I'm not sure that exists in Azure or not, but certainly GCP, you're able to pull from all the different data sources they have, tuck it into your platform.
And I'd say maybe another consideration, which kind of also goes into the batch versus chatty, is how you're orchestrating your processes. So if you're doing kind of one nightly load all in one big batch, maybe something like your Azure Data Factory, you have one big pipeline and it does everything you need to do, that makes sense. I know in your scenario, in some scenarios I've worked with, you might have where data or different events are kind of coming in throughout the day or whatever, right? So you might have it that anytime a file lands in storage, it can fire an event and you can have a process that kicks off on that event. So again, that would be where you'd use a much more lightweight service that can be run much more frequently, much more chatty, that's event driven versus maybe a scheduled big batch process. So batch versus maybe event driven and how chatty it is versus batch based. Those are just a few of the things you would think about.
How do you like that answer, Josh?
I saw that coming from Scott. I was waiting
Yeah.
for it. It depends. and there's no real answer to that one. It's just so broad.
So yeah, it starts with it depends, but.
Yep. I was waiting for that. No, it's great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And Josh, you snuck in under the intro wire. So your name, where you're coming from, and what you loved about the meetup tonight.
Yeah, so I'm Josh Limbaum. I work at Secure Insurance. I used to be a core BTS employee. And I'm the business intelligence technical lead over at Secure Insurance. And it's just great to actually talk to others again. I wish I could be in person, but unfortunately I couldn't. But it's great seeing this panel and actually listening to, what Rob's been up to and Scott, and also hearing from another side that's not necessarily Azure related, right? So we've worked in Azure and a Microsoft space for so long. It's great to hear the other side as well. So it's great. I love it.
All right, we have time for another question from the audience. Or at least a speak up to thank you about what you learned tonight.
I do have one question. So we can talk about the DBT tool. So what are the most challenging ways when we are applying analytic skills to use the DBT tool, for example, or any tool? So mainly looking for the challenge, because one of the challenge what I have is as a developer, I have analytic skills and I have the business role. When I try to query from the database, I spend more time to get the data from the multiple source, because sometimes from API feed may have some wrong data or missed data. So to address that, I need to spend more time on it to come up with the output, what exactly I expect the one to satisfy the business rule. So using this tool, help or not, or what are the challenges? So will it benefit or not to get the best output from the DBT for the model side?
So I guess let me answer and then let me know if I didn't answer the question. For our team, the hardest thing for the team that was using that tool, DBT, was to the stuff around it. It was the source control. It was, the commit stuff, pull requests, do all that kind of ceremony around it. The thing, DBT by itself is, I think what's great about it is so simple. You just set up the transformations and dependencies between them and it kind of runs. The only other piece is really the templating language, Jinja. To kind of think about it as a little templating language, that was the hardest thing to learn for people who have not done that before. If you've done web development in the past, and you know how to do for loop in a web page as an example, it's the exact same thing, slightly different syntax.
Does it sound like though DBT helps with your concern, Andrew, was in whether or not it saves time with a lot of the getting the data from these source systems, missing pieces, not correct, and troubleshoot the source all the time. Does DBT help with troubleshooting the source?
The DBT is a modeling tool,
Okay.
so it's not a tool that's going to do that. But you can do things like put checks in it. And it will run and tell you what percentage you're missing.
Okay.
You can put assertions of what you think the data will look like. It's all kind of, they'll be coded in SQL, but it's all there available to you to kind of use that.
So if you find patterns of things that are the trouble areas, you can turn over finding those that you know about to DBT.
Sure, or do with more metadata, put another a seed file which you materialize the reference table, and then you're able to kind of pattern match and fix things as time goes on.
So if you don't mind me jumping in, I can kind of dovetail into what you're saying too, on that. Don't disagree with anything you said, but I can take it a step further and say the DBT tool it's meant to run on a specific platform. It's not a tool that moves data outside another platform into this platform that you're working on right now. There are caveats to that, but for the most part, it is, like Juan said, it's a modeling tool. However, inside the modeling tool itself, there are they're like audit-like features that you can run within your data. So if you have an established model that you want to monitor, you can set up automated, call it DBT tests. So you can test uniqueness, not nullness. You could run specific SQL statements that you may want to test against. And then there's also other SQL that, think of it as like views that you can just save off and run at specific times to be able to monitor stuff. I don't know if it's actually going to help you with the problem that you're having with source data, but it can at least do its due diligence in telling you that, hey, the data that's coming through isn't working the way that you expect it to do through those tests and automated way, and through some, I forgot the name of what they call inside the tool, but there's a way to just have queries just hanging around, and if you need to call it, you can pass things into it. You don't have to like remember that piece of SQL. We don't use it that much because we just don't. Hopefully it helped.
So it looks like we make it some visibility about some source data or what we write as a visual statement, right? Kind of handy where we can, kind of the visibility where it helps to troubleshoot more and all. Okay.
Nice. All right. Then, unless there's a burning